Today's topic, as you can see, is removing data. And generally, you want to preserve most things, most everything that happens in the system, but there are certainly exceptions. For example, maybe data was entered into the system in error, etc. So exceptions where you will want to potentially remove data from the system. So today we'll cover scenarios like those and how you do it. Okay, so let's hop on over to Pipeline. So the first most common area that I want to cover where you may need to delete data is when you need to delete a transaction. So I'm on a transaction right now. Let's say that this transaction was added in error. Maybe it's a duplicate. Someone didn't realize that the transaction existed and created a duplicate, and you need to delete it. There's definitely a way to delete it. The person or people who need to delete it need to have master admin permissions. And you'll kind of hear that as a theme throughout a few of the items here. You need the highest level permission to delete something that big or that significant, particularly if it'll end up impacting the audit trail, which we'll talk about a few items that do that later, but also when you're deleting a transaction, that's a pretty big deal, right? So if a transaction needs to be deleted, the master admin can come to the transaction, go down to the lower right corner, they'll see this delete this transaction button. They can click it and then permanently delete that transaction. And I say permanently, but technically, if you delete a transaction and then decide that, oh, I really do need to retain that transaction or maybe pull something from it that existed that I didn't realize I needed, you can always reach out to us. If it's within a few months, typically we can recover that transaction. Okay. So again, deleting the transaction here. Next, I wanted to cover information related to transactions that you can delete. First are, of course, documents. You can delete documents if they're not needed here. Agents can delete their own docs up until the point that they're marked as reviewed, right? So if they haven't been marked yet as reviewed, they can delete their own. And admins can delete docs anytime. And just like when you delete a transaction, those are recoverable as well. So if I've got any deleted docs on a transaction, I can come here to view what they are and then also download them to recover them. Okay, coming back here. All right, so you can delete docs if necessary. That's probably a more common action that needs to be done because docs can be uploaded erroneously, etc. More often than obviously deleting transactions and so forth, some other items. Or the master admin can delete notes on transactions. If something was sent out erroneously or added to a transaction erroneously, the master admin will see this little X in the lower right corner of a note or message, and they can go ahead and delete that. Generally, we discourage not doing that because, again, this is audit trail information, and you want to document everything that has happened on a transaction. And also, if you were sending this message, if this was a message that was sent and not merely added to the transaction, this message has actually been received by someone, presumably, and that's not something that you can change. So deleting that will remove that history that that message was actually sent. So again, typically don't want to do that, but if a master admin deems that that's appropriate to do so, they can actually do it here. And unlike the docs that are recoverable or the transaction that's recoverable if you reach out to us, deleting notes and sent messages is not recoverable. So if I delete this, I can't get that back. I do still have the audit trail under here, under transaction history, that shows when that message was sent, as well as the fact that I just deleted it right now, right? So I've got the audit trail of what happened. I just can't recover the actual message. So there's that ability there. And then the last area I want to show you that's kind of related to that is under reference docs. And just a sort of a caution to keep this area tidy, right? People on your team are coming here to find docs that they need, typically need to get executed, etc. So you want this to be a clean area without obsolete docs or redundant docs, etc. So keeping it clean is helpful to keep this as an efficient page. And to delete docs that are either obsolete or redundant or whatever, you can do that the same as you do when you're deleting docs on transactions by clicking the gear icon and then hitting delete. An admin can do that. Okay. These are also not recoverable, so once you've deleted these, they are gone. All right. So those are the areas I wanted to show you where it's helpful to be able to remove data once it's, again, obsolete, redundant, just for whatever reason, not needed. Typically high permissions needed in order to get rid of much of that data. The last couple areas I wanted to tell you about are areas that actually cannot be removed, and that's by design. First, let's head over to admin settings and manage users. When you've got users that have either left or for whatever reason need to be, well, actually leaving is typically the only reason, they need to be set as inactive. You can deactivate those users. You cannot remove them entirely. And again, that's by design because any user that existed in the system can have activity associated with them. So you don't want to remove them entirely. You just want to deactivate them so that they're no longer listed in agent lists, staff lists, etc. No longer have access to the system, etc. But you do, but you can't actually remove them. Cannot. Okay. That said, just a reminder, I know I've talked about this before, but you also, just because you can't remove them, you don't want to recycle users. So let's say a user is left and then, a person has left the company and someone has come and replaced them. You don't want to reuse that, that user profile by just editing them and then changing the name and email address, etc. Maybe to retain the old permissions or whatever. You want to go ahead and deactivate that user and then create a new user for the new person that's coming. If you recycle that user, then you lose the audit trail of what that first person has done, because now that it's named someone else, it'll look like that new person has done it, right? So keep them separate so that you can retain those independent audit trails and know exactly which person has done what in the system. And then the last area is, again, by design, can't really change, and that's the transaction history. It's actually a feature of the system is you want a clean audit trail of exactly what has happened on a transaction. So when you're in the activity history for a transaction, this is truly what has happened. There's not a way to actually alter this audit trail. And again, that's a preferable thing. So just heads up there. And that's it, a nice short, sweet one for removing data.